Happy Manga Monday! Welcome back, or if you're new, hi, hello, welcome. My name is Zoe, and this is my channel, Ms. Manga, where I talk a lot about, you guessed it, manga. And today, if you didn't already know by the title and the thumbnail, I am putting together a tier list of all 19 Junji Ito volumes. So, sadly, there should be 20. Mimi's Tales of Terror is the newest Junji Ito collection, and it's coming out in October. I pre-ordered it on Right Stuff, formerly known as Right Stuff, now Crunchyroll. And I saw a little blurb down below about like not expecting, pre-orders in a timely fashion for a little bit. So I'm like, great. It was already a slim chance that I would get it, ahead of when I needed to film. But now it's looking really like it's not gonna happen. So I apologize for that. If by some miracle of the manga gods it does arrive beforehand, I will quickly read it and add it at the very end of my video. So I, won't be wearing the same outfit, or might not even be, able to film in my room. But, that's if it comes in time. More likely than not, I will just be adding it in my description box, what tier I would rank it in, and maybe a little sentence as to why. So yeah, look down below for that. When I do get it and read it, I will add it there. So as for the others, we are talking about 19 volumes of Junji Ito. Some of them are like a volume length, kind of short, but then there's others like my dear friend Uzumaki, who's just a little thick boy. And then of course we have Tomi, which I didn't even bring in, and she is a behemoth. So, there's quite a range of volume size. That being said, I'm just going to be ranking them, putting them in the tiers that I think they deserve to go in overall. So I'm judging it as a whole, each volume that was printed in English. This could differ greatly, obviously, from the Japanese publications that were published differently, and in other countries as well, I'm sure. So yeah. Anyway, I assume if you clicked on this video that a lot of you already know about the horror mangaka Junji Ito. He is a well-known horror mangaka and well-beloved in Japan as well as in America anyway, and I think by a lot of manga readers across the world. And you've most likely read some of his work. However, for those uninitiated few, welcome to the Junji Ito world. His stories are pretty out there, and I'd even say like absurd. The plot points of his stories might start out rooted in some sort of reality and our very real fears come to life, but then they kind of just go off the deep end. And I mean, I really personally love it, but yeah, like what I mean is there are curses with crazy influences, world absorbing planets, spirals taking over entire towns, or fish creatures attacking on land with robotic legs, just to name a few crazy out there concepts of his. And if you can, get back past that or embrace that as I do, then I think you'll really love this fun mixture of weird, disturbing, and entertaining. And I also think in many stories, the root of the horror feels like a representation of our very real yet fantastical childhood imaginations and fears running away with us. Just the creepy little things our tiny minds can't comprehend, twisted into these freaky fictional stories. There's also something really disturbing in his imagery at times, where especially the fish story, we'll get into it, and another simply disgusting image of pimples oozing haunts my dreams. They haunt my dreams. So yeah, just being out there, like, it is horrifying. I'm just saying that like it kind of goes beyond normal horror into the absurd, so it maybe takes a little of the weight off of the horror. The first thing that you will notice about Junji Ito is his art style. His art is distinctive and creepy, and you probably, if nothing else, have at least seen some of these creepy images around in the manga community. Yes, I did get this Junji Ito mug just for this video. I mean, also it's a really cool mug. So yeah, that's your cue to grab your own hot beverage, and let me know what you're drinking below. As I drink some tea, well, I spill the tea on my Junji Ito rankings. And I absolutely love Junji Ito. So yeah, if you don't know him, I hope to convert you into reading at least one of his stories and picking up at least one of these volumes. And if you already love Junji Ito like me and just are curious how I rank his titles, then buckle in, let's get going. First, I have to take you through my Junji Ito tier list real quick. So I just made this up. It'll be on the screen here, but I want to just go through it verbally as well. So first up is the S tier, and I titled it Spine-Tinglingly Amazing. It's a little bit of a mouthful. I was trying to kind of do like S with a word that started with S and also tied into spooky season, but it got harder as I went. So anyway, A tier is a spooky treat. It's not, you know, the best of the best in my humble opinion, but it's definitely worth the read. It's a good time. I, will read again type of books. Then we have our B tier, and it's only kind of creepy. Yeah, I couldn't really think of a B word, so sorry, I deviated from here on. And only kind of creepy reads are not reads of his that I'd necessarily be like, oh my god, you need to read this. This is amazing. Like, it's just okay reads. These were good reads, average reads, good sampling of his work. Nothing amazing, but nothing that, turned me off. And then moving down, we have our C tier, mushy pumpkin. Nobody likes a mushy pumpkin, but they're not the worst thing in the world. Like, they kind of have character. They're kind of cute. You can see some redeeming qualities, but now it's a little bit rotting. So not my favorite. Moving on to our D tier, and that is the worm-infested apple. Nobody wants a worm-infested apple. It's disgusting. This is my harshest tier. This is the tier that I wouldn't read these again, to be frank with you. I wouldn't recommend them. And just for me personally, again, this is all personal. You can love a series that I hate. I have reasons why I don't love them. And it's just that if I put this volume up against, any of the other volumes, and I think it's just not worth reading it again, it's gonna end up in the worm-infested apple. So yeah, those are the tiers, and let's get talking about the manga now. So our first manga, and actually the first volume I read or reread, I'd say at least half, if probably like 70% of these I had already read, but I wanted to give them a fair shot and compare them all against each other. So I reread a lot of them. And this was the first one, and it's Dissolving Classroom. And this story follows a pair of twisted siblings, Yuma, a young man connected with the devil and the deep urge to apologize, and Chizumi, his terrifying little sister. So this is a short read of tales that all follow these horrific siblings and the horrors that they bring wherever they go. It's a very disgusting imagery. We got brains melting through our eyeballs, and yeah, it's pretty interesting concept-wise. It almost kind of plays on that Japanese, in a lot of cultures, but especially I think of Japan and the over-apologizing cultures, so it kind of plays into that, twisting it, perverting it into being demonic, apologizing so much that it's actually cursing people. Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, I really enjoyed this one. I think it's fun read, but I can't give it more than only kind of creepy on the tier list. I don't think it's a bad read, but I wouldn't necessarily shout it from the rooftops that this is a work of his you need to read. It just is good. Next up, we have Deserter. This one I hadn't read before, and it's a collection of short stories. A lot of these are collections of short stories. And by the way, and most of these stories felt like they had an intriguing premise, but ended before I really got into it and before the impact of the story could really hit me. It was strange because it's not how I usually feel, but the last story, in my opinion, was definitely the best and is the story that the collection is named after, The Deserter. And it was full of a kind of psychological horror with a interesting twist at the end. But overall, I really didn't like this collection, to be honest with you. I felt most of the stories, like I said, lacked impact, kind of forgettable, and just that last story really stuck with me and I thought was really good. And so I'm putting it in the mushy pumpkin. It's not worm-infested apple. It's not bad. It's okay. Next up, we have Soichi's collection, my boy here. He is usually pictured with the telltale nails in his mouth, and he just likes to suck on some nails because he's iron deficient. That's the best way to get your iron. Anyway, so I really like how creepy and off-putting Soichi is and how he's surrounded by an otherwise perfectly normal family, so it just makes him stand out all the more. And he obviously does have some kind of ability, power, cursing, people that actually does at times work and has real effects that are supernatural. And like everyone around him just kind of shrugs these crazy things off. But I also liked how a lot of times his plans to like wreak havoc with an individual or whatever just didn't go as planned, and sometimes would even backfire on him, and he'd fail, he'd get embarrassed, and it just felt very childlike. Like it captured that Soichi is a creepy curse ability wielding child, but a child nonetheless. And it's kind of fun to see when he fails, to be honest. But however, I really didn't like how this collection ended. The ending is so abrupt and leaves you really hanging. And then I'll get to this when I get to the other collection, but there's actually a collection of short stories that has like 2 or 3 more Soichi stories in it. And those weren't included in the Soichi collection. And I think would have been a really good ending to overall this collection based on Soichi. So a little disappointing. And for that reason, it's going in the only kind of creepy category. It's decent, but not amazing. Next up, we have Fragments of Horror. So I actually wasn't expecting this to be another short story anthology because it's rather thin. So I kind of thought it would be an all-encompassing, tied together story. But it's a collection. That being said, the short stories in it really stuck out to me. Like, I hadn't read this one, and I was really, like, the images from these stories stuck with me. There's the bird woman, the story about after images, and the girl who just can't decide anything for herself. And I don't know why, these stories just piqued my interest. I thoroughly enjoyed all of them. Those 3 stuck out to me the most, but like, it was just a solid collection. So I'm putting that one in a spooky treat. I definitely think it's a good short little dose of Junji Ito if you just want a spooky, shorter collection to indulge in. Maybe have some tea, light a candle, and read some creepy stories. Next up, we have Venus in the Blind Spot, which is again a very small volume of collected short stories, and I feel like these actually kind of had a common theme. Sometimes I feel like I can gather a theme from a collection, and other times I can't. But in this particular case, I just felt like all of these short stories are all about the consequences of human emotions. Emotions and feelings that are really integral to the human experience, like lust, love, desire, passion, and loneliness. Only they're all distorted to show the very worst of humanity, and nearly all of them had a commonality of being kind of sensual and or sexual in nature, kind of undertones or more obvious stories, though like obviously not in a romantic sense, but like the perversion of these sexual, sensual desires taken to the extreme. Yeah. So I really liked it. I thought it was another good, solid, creepy collection. All the stories pretty much hit with me, and for that reason I'm going to be putting it right next to Fragments of Horror in a spooky treat tier. Next up, we have Tombs, which is a bigger short story collection, and these were really good and creepy reads as well. I was hitting them for a while, like a good solid selection. Solid short story collections, one right after the other. And I'm not exactly sure there's like a concrete theme across all of them, but secrets did keep popping up in a lot of this one, from the beginning one where there's an accidental hit and run and they try to cover this up, to secrets forming physical manifestations and a town full of mysterious secrets. And overall, again, I really enjoyed these, and I have to say, it turned out to be my favorite collection. My favorite, volume that's full of short stories that don't tie together or have any overarching theme. And it is the first entry into the spine-tinglingly amazing tier. I don't know why, I just really, really liked all the stories and couldn't stop reading. I was very immersed, and so it deserves to be in my S tier. I'm curious if any of you felt similarly about this collection or not, because it's the only collection that made it into the S tier. So next up, we have Smashed, and this is another short story collection, and the one that I was referencing before when I was talking about the Soichi collection. So this features 3 short Soichi stories that aren't featured in the Soichi collection, and I really, really liked them. They were the highlight for me of this short story and how I was introduced to Soichi, because I had read this collection before, and it kind of shows what did or what could have happened after the end of the actual Soichi collection. So again, it's just kind of bizarre because it's not like they haven't printed stories from one collection into another before. Came across it a couple times, so I just don't get the choice not to take these 3 stories and put it at the end of the Soichi collection where I think they belong. But yeah, I enjoyed them in Smashed. Like I said, they were the highlight of this collection, and I just otherwise did not really enjoy this collection. I felt the same way as I felt about Deserted, and so for that reason, it's going into the mushy pumpkin category. Next up is Remina, and this is actually a short story that is a continuous plot story. So the first since the very first entry into here, Dissolving Classroom, and I appreciated the difference in like genre that this one was going for. It was leaning more heavily into sci-fi, futuristic, planet type horror. But the supernatural things just felt a little bit too absurd, which I know it's like, pick a lane. Do you like the absurd or do you not? But I just have to be honest. At like the halfway mark, I felt like it could have ended and I would have felt more satisfied. And it just kept going and getting more and more ridiculous and just kind of like, okay. I just couldn't get invested in the series because it just crossed that imaginary line into, I can no longer suspend my disbelief. I can no longer just sit back and enjoy the absurdity. So for me, this is my first entry into the worm-infested apple tier. I do not think this makes it a bad story. Just, I want to put that out there. I was a little harsh on, talking about the worm-infested tier, but when I think of this story, I just know that when I look at all my Junji Ito collections, that's not the one I'm gonna ever go, oh hey, maybe I want to reread this one. Because I just don't think I will want to. you know, even if I don't remember details about it, I'll just remember like, I don't remember feeling satisfied with it. So then I'll pick one I remember feeling more satisfied by. The only thing going for it is shorter, so there's a chance I would pick it up and reread it, but it's not likely. And that's why, sorry, it's in the D tier. Following that up, we have the Frankenstein collection. So I'm going to preface this. I'm going to preface my decision on the ranking of this one with a little backstory, a little bit of information about yours truly. And I was an English major, and like the snooty kind of English major, you know, I was that pretentious nerd who loved to read, and I loved the classics. I've read a lot of them, sometimes for fun. I'm that type of nerd. Okay, so I've read Frankenstein, the original Mary Shelley Frankenstein, at least twice, if not a third time. It's hard to remember, but I've read it enough that I'm fairly familiar with the story. I really like this story. And first and foremost, this iteration, this manga adaptation from Ito just doesn't hit the same. It doesn't have the same emotional depth. I think it's just that it can't really get into Victor's mindset, his thoughts, his, you know, narration, because it's, you know, it moves a lot quicker, obviously, and it just kind of sums up the things that happens rather than really delve into the things. But that being said, this is not why, this is not what makes me really annoyed with this adaptation. What makes me really bothered is the liberties taken by Ito. I'm sorry, I love you, man, but no. In the end, he changes a major detail, a major one. And I had already thought he did, but I looked it up just to be sure. I looked on Spark Notes because I was like, maybe my memory is failing me in my old age. You know, getting up in years. Maybe I'm misremembering something. But no, he very clearly deviates from the original story. And deviations are fine in adaptations, don't get me wrong. But it takes an element, a really integral element out of the story, in my opinion. So the monster that Victor creates, if you don't know Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein is a mad scientist kind of, and he creates a monster, a living being from the corpses of the dead. He reanimates the dead. And this monster has a lot, you know, it goes through, and I'm not going to get all into it because that would take me forever, but I'll just say that the monster isn't purely evil, and it's not purely good. It is like most humans. It is capable of both. It does lean towards the evil. The choices it makes are not good, but we see why it makes those choices. So near the end, probably like the 2/3 mark, he comes to Victor, the monster does, with a proposition. Make me a mate and we will disappear. You will never have to see me again, and I will have a companion. So in the actual story, Victor makes him, I'm sorry, I'm spoiling this. Victor begins to make this mate, to make another monster. He freaks out, decides it's not worth it, and destroys the creation before it can be brought to life, essentially, before we can even see if the monster would have upheld his end of the bargain, because a leading, you know, motivation for this monster and a leading reason it was leaning towards evil was its overarching loneliness and just outsiderness, to the umpteenth degree, being a kind of decaying, put together, corpsey creature. So you feel sympathy for the creature, and then you understand why it does the things it does. Okay, so in this iteration, Frankenstein just makes the monster, has his friend involved, talking him like, yeah, let's do it, pumping him up, makes her the mate. The mate comes to life, can't speak English, which has already been established that, yeah, they can't speak English right from the get-go. The monster, the original one, had to learn it. And so the monster freaks out, thinks Victor's trying to kill me, destroys the creation, the mate, and then goes on a killing rampage, essentially taking any ambiguity out of the monster's motivations. So I'm sorry, it's a fail for me, a big stamp of disapproval. My English classic literature brain does not approve. There are some short stories at the end about a kind of alternate house that contains pathways to alternate dimensions that is pretty interesting, but it cannot make me rank this collection higher because of the main story contained in it, which is Frankenstein. I'm sorry that was a long-winded rant, even though I tried to condense it, but yeah, it's worm-infested apple for sure. I had read it already. I forced myself to reread it, even knowing it would anger me, just for you guys. And to be fair, I did try to go in it thinking, you know what, maybe it won't seem as bad. Maybe whatever egregious, feeling you had about it was you were being a little bit too nitpicky. But I just think this is just too big of a deviation. It takes too much away from the original story. So to me, it belongs there. It belongs in D tier. Sorry, not sorry. All right, so now we move on to another adaptation. No Longer Human. So I still have mixed feelings about this version of No Longer Human. This is, again, my second time reading it. I had read it before. However, I've never read the original novel it's based on. I'm gonna put that out there. And I have a feeling, because of the time period that it was written originally, this one is probably more faithful. Perhaps, I don't know, Frankenstein there, but I'm gonna say, without knowing for sure, this might be the more faithful adaptation, more faithful manga. Sorry, excuse me. The more faithful manga adaptation. That being said, I read this version of No Longer Human first by Usamaru Furuya. Sorry if I butchered the name, but yeah, so I had read this version first, this manga adaptation first. I just personally felt more after reading this one than Junji Ito's manga adaptation. So I can't help but compare the two. It's not like I want to compare the two. It's just my brain won't, like Frankenstein. I'm going to compare it to the original source. I'm going to compare No Longer Human to the other No Longer Human adaptation I read. And that one just made me feel a prolonged sense of emptiness after reading it. It just really gave me I don't know, it's not good to be depressed after reading something, but it's also a feat to have made another human being feel that way from just, your writing, you're a piece of fiction. Whereas when I finished Junji Ito's No Longer Human, I just kind of felt annoyed. I know that sounds bad, but it's how I felt. I can't give you an exact reason as to why I felt this way, though there's definitely parts that have a very misogynistic tone throughout this volume, and yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. There's almost a desire to completely give our main character a pass in a lot of ways and make him the one true victim in all of this, which I just don't like it. I don't. I think the women he encounters, at least in more the second half of the novel when he's an adult, I do recognize that he was a victim in a lot of things that happen in the beginning. Very much a victim, and I do feel very sorry for him, but things that he did really was horrible to women, especially again and again and again, with basically no remorse for his actions. So it just really turned me off. This one, I'd say, has the most trigger warnings. There is suicidal ideation, attempted murder, death, drug addiction, alcoholism, family trauma, essay, rape, pedophilia. The list goes on. So yeah, be warned that it's a lot. It's a lot. there's no shortage of depravity in it, and the depictions of human beings as essentially at our core cruel, selfish, abhorrent creatures. It stands out in it definitely lacks the absurdity of Ito's original works, and leans heavily into reality. It loses that Junji Ito charm, but on the other hand, I do think his imagery really lends to the story. I don't think he was a bad choice to do a manga adaptation for this work. Saying that as someone who's never read the original work, but so I think it complements the story, and for that reason, and because I overall think it's a good-ish story. I'm just gonna put it in the mushy pumpkin, okay? I know I see a lot of 5 stars on this one. I will probably get the most hate on this one. That's okay. Let me know what you think in the comments, why you would rate it higher or defend it to me. I would love to hear what you think, how you feel about this one, and why I should rate it higher. I just can't personally. And this is my personal tier list, so mushy pumpkin tier it is. Alrighty, moving on from the darkest of the Junji Ito's works to the latest with Cat Diary. This is just a cute collection of stories about Junji Ito's cats. I mean, you can't go wrong with it. It's lighter and sillier in tone compared to all of his usual work. And yeah, Yon and Moo, his 2 cats, are just adorable. I really liked how Junji Ito was kind of against cats, definitely not a cat person in the beginning, and how he kind of really warmed up to the cats, and especially his desire for the cats to love him. I understand, it's funny. He just wanted them to give him attention so bad, but cats are fickle. Cats will choose you. You cannot choose what they do. And I like that about cats. I'm a cat person, if you couldn't tell. If you haven't seen my cats make a cameo in here, they're not the most social of cats, but yeah, they have been in a video, popping in a video or 2 from time to time. Yeah, so it's a pretty cute, funny, harmless collection of short stories about the cats, and then of course we get the end, which includes Yon's passing, and I was just like crying because it just made me think about my own sweet cats of the past that have sadly left. And oh yeah, I'm a baby, and I bawled at it. It was just so sad. But overall, even though it elicited tears from me, I wouldn't say this was a great must read, and I'd put it in the only kind of creepy category. It's, for what it is, a nice, pleasant read, a pleasant deviation from his usual out there freaky horror stuff, and a little more toned down and silly. So I liked it. It's like a little refresher, especially after No Longer Human. Moving right along, I decided to tackle that monstrosity known as Tomi. So Tomi is a really fascinating concept, and it just keeps like evolving and twisting as it goes. I don't know why, I just really like it. I really do. Tomi is like a parasite who invades and takes over hosts, essentially transforming them, completely taking over them and making them more Tomis. If like her bodily fluid enters into another person. And then there are the men that fall in love with her, and it drives them mad, and to a point that they just want to just kill her and dismember her. It's so weird. It's so twisty, but interesting. Like it feels more psychological. It feels more rooted in reality than a lot of his other works, in my opinion. I always have to like put that in there, a little caveat to cover my ass. I liked how a good amount of the characters kind of intertwine and show up in other short stories as it goes along, and it really highlights like desire, jealousy, and obsession with the people interacting with Tomi. They get involved with her, and Tomi herself, who, you know, can exhibit these to the extreme as well, and it kind of leads to their mutual destruction. I don't know, I like it. Bravo, Tomi. This is my second time reading Tomi, and I enjoyed it as much as I did the first time reading. I was pleasantly surprised how quickly I read through it, and it is being the hulking behemoth that it is. And yeah, I'm comfortably happy to say it deserves a spot in the spine-tinglingly amazing tier. Next up, we have Gyo. So this is probably the only one that changed in my opinion, but I'll get to that. So it also is the one that turns my stomach the most overall. Honestly, even though I can't smell, like I can't smell what they're smelling in the story, but the way they talk about it and just like the imagery itself really leaves me feeling queasy as I read it. Like even rereading it, like I just get this queasy, just disgusted feeling. And yeah, just like the rotting fish imagery, just yeah, not a fan, but it's effective, I must say. And yeah, it gives me probably out of all of his works, other than one short story, the pimple disgusting gusher one that I kind of mentioned in the beginning, it definitely gives me the most visceral reaction when I read it. And so if you're sensitive to that, I definitely don't think maybe you should pass on Gyo. Not that it's bad, just that it might turn your stomach a little bit. That being said, I think it's really great. I do. I think that, again, for a work of fiction to elicit such a extreme feeling, I think is an accomplishment, you know? And when I had read it before, you know, having gone into this with the idea of doing this tier list and rereading and reading what I hadn't read yet, I was thinking this was going to be an easy S tier. I just remembered really enjoying it. And don't get me wrong, I still really enjoyed it. However, I guess I forgot, or I didn't care as much, I guess, the first time I read it. I don't know which, but how shittily Kaori is portrayed. How there's just like nothing redeeming about her character, to be honest with you. She's just very annoying and unlikable from the get-go, before any weird fish with robotic legs emerge on land, which is the premise. Yeah, before even anything really creepy happens, she's just so whiny and annoying, and it just makes it really hard to care about her and what happens to her, and also about their relationship. There's Kaori and the guy, I'm sorry I didn't write it down, so I don't remember, but they, you know, they're in a relationship. I think they're engaged, honestly, and it just feels like, I don't know why. But anyway, it would have been nice to see a nicer side of her, to kind of get why they were together, maybe, I don't know, and give especially more emotional weight to the ending. If Ito had just given her character a couple of redeeming qualities, a couple of nice moments, but he doesn't, and so the ending just lacks any oomph that I think it definitely would have if he'd taken that time. There's also some extra stories at the end that are duplicates found in Smashed, and they're not my favorite, and they're totally unnecessary. They add nothing, but yeah, they're just there. It neither rises or lowers the overall Gyo story itself, which is the main story. And I had to, you know, retroactively take it down a tier in my mind. So instead of being S tier, I think it deserves to be in a spooky treat. It's still very good. It's still a spooky treat. It's worth a read, if you're not squeamish. But it just wasn't as amazing as I remembered, I guess. So yeah. We're back to the short story collections with Love Sickness. So this was a solid collection of short stories. The first bunch of stories, I'd say like the first fourth or third maybe, but those stories were all interconnected and centered around this creepy town that it's foggy a lot of the times, and this tradition that they have of people going to intersections and asking random strangers, the first random stranger that passes you, for their love fortune. So they'll like ask them a question like, oh, should I confess to this boy? Or so they'll ask a question, and then the stranger, whatever answer they give is like impacts their decision, I guess. That's how they go with it. It's a really strange tradition, but I found it very interesting. However, overall, I just kind of felt like it was a bit incomplete. It was getting really interesting, and then it just ends. I don't know. It left me feeling unfulfilled. So yeah, super interesting concept, okay execution. And then the other short stories in the collection, the rest of them weren't really any standouts for me other than this first part. So I would put it in the only kind of creepy tier. It's not bad. It's not great. It was an okay read. I had an okay time. Next up is Censor. Censor is a standalone interwoven story. It's a small volume, and it is in a vein more similar to Remina, I feel. It just kind of is a bit different of a tone. I don't know how to describe it, but it's more focused on cold telepathy and philosophical ponderings of the universe. It's enjoyable in some regards, but overall, I feel like a disconnect with it. I don't know how to explain it. Anyway, I ended up just tossing it in the middle ground of only kind of creepy. I couldn't rank it higher. I didn't think anything was necessarily not good about it to make me rank it lower. I didn't feel particularly strongly either way, I guess. Next up, and one I did feel very strongly about, is Black Paradox. So I think this one, kind of like how No Longer Human might give me the most hate, will get me the most what the fuckery? I do not understand why you would put it so high. I don't either. It's just a feeling. It's just my opinion. But I think this is so good. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I don't know why. Anyway, the summary is just the story itself. It's a short volume, but it's a complete story interconnected around these four strangers. They meet online in like chat rooms, and they all have the desire to take their own lives. So trigger warning there, due to an anxiety they feel about the future and a inability to escape what they see as another version of themselves. They all feel like it's just too much to go on with their lives. And yeah, so they all go into the woods to end their lives, and then things just they just go off the rails. Like I can't even begin to explain what this is about after that point, or how it comes to be. It is definitely very absurd, but for whatever reason, this absurdity tickled my fancy. Why Remina didn't, why Censor didn't really hit the bar, I don't know, but this one did. It was absurd in the best way, and I really enjoyed rereading it. Like I was thinking this might be a Geo moment, that it would fall lower than what I had previously felt my first time reading it, and stacked against, his copious amounts of work. But no, I just feel like it still stands up. It stands out as a really, really enjoyable read, and it's just dark and weirdly fun at the same time, and it's got this nihilistic hopelessness to it, and I'm just here for it. I don't know what else to tell you except for it is going in my spine-tinglingly amazing tier. Yeah, it's just that good. To me anyway. I love it. And going back to the small volumes that are just short stories collections, we have Liminal Zone. And this one was, another one featured 4 different stories. I felt like they were all fine stories, solid, but nothing really stuck out to me. Nothing was spectacular. Nothing. Honestly, I had forgotten to write my initial feelings in my review on it, so I went on Amazon to be like, refresh me again, what are these stories that it includes, what's the standout moments people comment in the reviews or whatever, and they someone actually listed out all 4 of them for me, and I was like, Oh yeah, oh yeah. I was like, oh yeah, the Weeping Women and the Maria weird churchy religious one was that was weird. But yeah, nothing really stuck with me. Like it was literally forgettable. I hadn't written the review in 5 days. I think it was only 5 days later. I was like, oh crap, I didn't write the review. What was it about? What stories did it have? Again? No, nothing? Okay. When nothing sticks out to me, I can't rank it any higher than just average to me. So for that reason, it's going in the only kind of creepy category. Nothing wrong with it, but nothing memorable or standout. So yeah, that's where it goes. Last up in the collections, we have Shiver. So I remembered really loving Shiver. I thought it was a really solid collection, and honestly, it had stood out to me from the other collections I had read previously. I hadn't read Tombs yet, by the way, just saying. But the other ones that I had read, it really stood out to me. And then I saw the back of the book when I was when I was going to read it, and it was advertised as 9 of Junji Ito's best short stories as selected by the author himself. And I was like, oh, honestly, this makes sense why it's a pretty solid standout collection. These are a good sampling of Junji Ito's works. And I think if you're at all curious about like his brand of horror, you haven't read anything from Junji Ito, I think this is a good collection to start with. Like if you want to just dip your toes into the Junji Ito world, you'll get a little bit of everything in this collection. And you also get some personal commentaries from Junji Ito himself after each work, kind of just some background or some interesting tidbits, which are, I think, fun to read. Adds a little something extra to those short stories. And it has some of my favorite short stories. I don't know why, but the balloon they're not called balloons. The hanging blimp story. I don't know why. It's like one of my favorite short stories. It was when I read it before, and when I reread it, I still really like it. It's just the creepy suspense, the just absurdity of it, it works. And I think it's a really good short story in my opinion. You also get a chapter of Tomi in Painter, which is a really good Tomi short story, and gives you kind of a feeling if you like to read more of her stories in particular. I skipped it at this point because I had already read Tomi. Sorry, I didn't reread it. But I saw it was there and I was like, well, this is good. Like, again, if you want a sampling of what Junji Ito is about, this is a good collection to pick up. And it also features that nauseating pimples scene. Oh, God. The last story in there has this just disgusting oozing pimple thing that it is now for a while, I'm sure, going to be seared into my brain and I can't escape it. But yeah, gives you really gross imagery, gives you really good stories, and if you're at all interested and haven't picked up anything by him and you don't want to dive right into the continuous story collections, then maybe you want to check this one out. That being said, I ended up putting this in a spooky treat tier. I think it's just a little below the S tier. It's like right on the edge. I was torn. I was like S or A, and I ended up just putting it in A. And last of Junji Ito's collected works, unless for some reason I get Mimi's Tales of Terror before this goes up, but it's not likely, we have the crown jewel, in my opinion, Uzumaki. Uzumaki is a great interconnected story about a town being taken over by spirals, of all things. It is very absurd, it's very strange, but it's done in a really good way that there's just these creepingly weird elements introduced at first that just keep getting crazier and crazier and stranger as it goes on until it's full bedlam at the end. And it actually feels like a conclusion to the story, which I appreciate. I don't feel left hanging. And I feel like it's just a really good story. Really great. Probably, in my opinion, the best continuous story from Junji Ito that I've read as of now anyway. And I just, the spiral slowly taking over the town is so strange and disturbing, and it has an absorbing, mesmerizing quality to the story, a story about mesmerizing spirals itself. So it's trippy and surreal and just overall a fun read, in my opinion. Like, I was Junji Ito'd out by this point. Like, I'm gonna say it, I read 18 volumes and then I still had to read Uzumaki. I saved it for last because I wanted to compare it evenly across the board. I wanted to, you know, have as much time from it as possible because I had really liked it when I first read it. I really thought it was standout. But I wanted to try and be more fair, not read it off the gate and compare everything to it, but more compare everything to Uzumaki at the end. That being said, it was very hard to read it because I was like, oh my god, I gotta read one more. I still gotta read this one. Like, it's not a little baby. It's a thick boy. And I was like, oh my god, I gotta read this still. I gotta read this before I can film this. So I ended up finally opening it up at like midnight. I was like, I'll just read like a couple chapters just to get started. And I was up until like 1 and I got like halfway through, if not a little more. And I was like, oh, got me again. Sucked me into the story. It's just that good. It really does suck you in, just like a spiral. Oh my gosh. Anyway. And yeah, in my opinion, if you only want to read one story by Junji Ito, if you just want to get one volume of Junji Ito to say, I read Junji Ito, I have this volume of Junji Ito, I would just recommend this one to you. Like, this is the one you should read. Enough said. My favorite. It's the best of the best in my humble opinion. And of course, as expected, it goes in the spine-tinglingly amazing tier. Perfection. Of course, I would love to hear your opinions on any of these Junji Ito volumes. If you've read them all and you want to like rank them all in the comments, go for it. If you want to just tell me your favorite Junji Ito read, whether it's Uzumaki or something completely different, then I'd love to hear. I also would love to hear, even if you think I am crazy for ranking something so low that you think is a standout of Junji Ito's. I'm okay with constructive criticism. I'm okay with differing opinions. Just don't be mean and we're all good. I know as human beings, we all internalize, we all read something and have a different opinion and reaction and feeling to it based on our own experiences, our own preferences, yada, yada, yada. So it's all good here. And of course, if you like this video, if you made it to the end, give yourself a thumbs up and click the like button for me as well. Be much appreciated. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe. Everyone who subscribes and comments is always super appreciated, and I try and interact as much as I can with the comments on the videos, so thank you. And with that being said, tomorrow is Halloween, so have a happy Halloween, and until next time, bye!